Fellow truth seekers, this and that aficionados, cosmic warriors, we are back with This and That podcast, unofficial episode 11, I believe. This one is The Origin of Everything, Humanity, and the Cosmos, aka the Conspiracy of Reality. And we're splitting it into 5 parts, and this is going to carry us over for probably the next month of content. It's the Origin of Everything series split into 5 different parts. I'm going to get into all 5 different parts today, but this is just the part 0, the mini explanation of each, and then each part is going to get its own distinctive episode. In addition to the studio, we got the JFK meeting the alien. That's a classified photo there on the bottom right of your screen. So part 0 of the part 0, let's get into it today. And after, going pretty deep into some kind of CIA operations, Mossad, Israel intelligence apparatus, Danny Castellaro, Robert Maxwell, octopus murders type of territory the past couple of episodes. And obviously the paranoia is only going to continue to mount in my journalism, third-party journalist, dark journalist, podcaster, blogger, truth seeker career. And instead of, talking about all the shady intelligence world and the deep state kill list and all the martyrs that have died, I'm going to spend the next few episodes just talking about the super speculative origin of everything, ancient apocalypse, Atlantis, Younger Dryas, Egypt, and you'll see what the outline is like over the course of this next half hour. But here we go, part 0 of the part 0, the origin of everything, the origin of humanity, the origin of the cosmos. This is the conspiracy of the reality we inhabit, and it is based on the overarching premise that the prehistoric timeline is incorrect. We are indeed a species with amnesia. An advanced human or alien hybrid civilization was operating on Earth. It got wiped out or severely reset around 10,000 BC. We can use the Plato date of 9600 BC, and the mainstream archaeological record is incomplete at best and actively distorted at worst. Everything after that is a reboot with fragments of memory preserved in stone, myth, and scripture. It was Albert Einstein that said, "The distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion." And that goes hand in hand with one of the core pillars of quantum mechanics, the retrocausality theory. Not only does the past influence the future, but the future actually somehow influences the past. Check out my Instagram, thisandthat.ancient. I recently split up my Instagram into like 10 different accounts. So in addition to my main account at this and that, we got thisandthat.ancient, thisandthat.uap, thisandthat.quantum, thisandthat.universe, as well as obviously the this and that podcast, which is just the videos of me talking, when my main this and that account is, clips of some of my favorite podcasters, YouTubers, etc. And we got the This and That app, of course, which we are finally 1 month, probably 2-3 weeks away from launch. We are officially in beta mode. I'm going to start advertising for that more and talking about that. I'll probably give it its own podcast episode about the app. It's a new era of social media, transparent, authentic social media. This and That digital phase 1. Rank and review your favorite movies, shows, podcasts, books, etc. But let's get into the origin of everything, which begins with a likely probability masquerading as a forbidden possibility. And that's the fact that civilization may not be a straight line from primitive humanity to modern progress, but a cycle of ascent, catastrophes, survival, and forgetting. Across 5 interconnected investigations, the series reopens the case of human history, from Göbekli Tepe, Atlantis, and the Younger Dryas reset, to the impossible precision of Giza, the older face of the Sphinx, and Egypt's memory of Zep Tepi, aka the first time. We're going to follow this endangered inheritance into Alexandria, where the ancient world attempted to collect its knowledge in one place, and then into the wars that transferred power from Egypt to Rome. That is the most important event of the course of the last few millennia, and it is what separates BC to AD, because BC belonged to Egypt and AD belonged to Rome. Once the biggest empire in the world shifted from Egypt to Rome, that is when the timeline flipped, and that is no coincidence. that conquest was not completed by one battle or one fire. Memory was absorbed, defunded, fragmented, translated, canonized, and rewritten until the victorious civilization inherited the authority to decide which cultures represented wisdom, which stories became mythology, which texts became scripture, and where history itself would begin. And that's why we feel like we are a species with amnesia, because the burning of the Library of Alexandria, which represented all of this ancient Egyptian esoteric knowledge, potentially, Book of Enoch type, alien type of stuff that is apocryphal in the Bible, and some of these books that aren't included in the Bible, Book of Giants, Book of Jubilees, and essentially Rome was able to rewrite history. But what we call the birth of civilization may therefore have been a reboot, and what we call history may be only the surviving account of the most recent cycle. So from there, the investigation moves beneath the Bible and beyond the earth. So part 3 is going to get into the Sumerian tablets describing the kingship descending from the heaven, the antediluvian pre-flood era, the Sumerian kings list type of antediluvian rulers, and the fact that humanity fashioned by divine beings in a catastrophic flood survived long before Noah. We're going to talk about Book of Enoch, Book of Jubilees, and of course the Dead Sea Scrolls, which preserve the stories of the Watchers, the Nephilim, the forbidden technologies, heavenly councils, and a cosmic rebellion later compressed into theology. And we have to ask ourselves if these are merely recurring myths or inherited literary traditions and symbolic attempts to explain nature, maybe to explain the nature of nature, the nature of reality, or are they corrupted memories of real catastrophes and encounters with intelligences that humanity understood as gods, angels, and demons? This is kind of the whole UFO as a spiritual concept, that UFOs are indeed some form of angels and demons, but we just classify them as angels and demons because we can't comprehend the technology. Maybe they're not even inherently physical phenomena. Maybe they are spiritual type of things that are bleeding into this reality from alternate realities, and that goes on kind of with the overarching premises that humanity is essentially the playground for supernatural forces of good and evil, and of course it's the centuries, millennia long cosmic battle between good and evil, and that manifests itself in humanity. And there's all types of alien, whether they're extraterrestrial or interdimensional, that kind of manifest in humanity. And beyond the Bible and the ancient Sumeria chapter, the final chapter, chapter 5, the craziest chapter of all, the conspiracy of the cosmos, these are going to be questions that extend beyond just the solar system. But it begs the question, was Mars once habitable? Is this planetary gap of Maldek and Tiamat between Mars and Jupiter? Was there a planet in between Mars and Jupiter what the asteroid belt would suggest? We're going to talk about the moon and how there's the moonspiracy, the weird coincidences with the moon, whether the moon could be potentially an alien artificial satellite, a terraforming device, and the moon's improbable influence over the Earth, as well as remote viewing accounts from people like Joe McMoneagle and Ingo Swann, the alleged lunar structures, the alleged scattered monoliths across the solar system, this idea of a secret space program, and competing theories that Earth is a school, maybe it's a zoo, it's a prison, it's a farm, it's a Luge theory, it could be a genetically directed experiment, and I have kind of slowly come to the belief that Earth is some form of a petri dish. Humanity is the result of alien experimentation. The moon could be a terraforming device to monitor us, and reality is a lot stranger than fiction. This is kind of the David Wilcock ancient builder race, super speculative territory. I'll put out a few disclaimers in this podcast, but we're going to venture into quite speculative territory here, especially in part 5, the conspiracy of the cosmos. But none of these possibilities are proven as to what Earth is and to what humanity is, and some of these theories probably do collapse under scrutiny, but together they form kind of one overwhelming warning that intelligence repeatedly develops faster than wisdom, technology becomes domination, and civilizations destroy themselves before understanding consciousness or their place in the cosmos. The asteroid belt might be this graveyard. Mars could be the warning where once intelligent life was, and there could have been a nuclear disaster at Maldek in between Mars and Jupiter, maybe on Mars itself. It has xenon and argon isotopes that we're going to get into that could be indicative of a nuclear holocaust. Joe McMoneagle said he saw humanoids and pyramids on Mars. Again, we're going to get into all of this. But yeah, asteroid belt is the graveyard, Mars is the warning, the moon is the witness, and Earth is the experiment. Humanity may be on the verge of finally passing the Great Filter and becoming a Kardashev 1 civilization and a multiplanetary species that is able to harness the full power of the planet and control the weather, things like such. Or we may be on the verge of another nuclear doomsday or natural disaster en route back to the Stone Ages. And so the overarching, premise, thesis of the origin of everything is that history is cyclical. We are taught to believe that humanity is linear. We came from Mesopotamia. That was the first civilization, 6500 BC. But I am here to tell you what many of my ancient apocalypse researchers have told me, that civilization is indeed cyclical as opposed to linear. There was a Younger Dryas cataclysm. The myths, the flood myth that appears in almost every religious text is based on truth, and there was an antediluvian pre-flood era where humans interacted with some form of alien species, and it talks about rulers that ruled the earth for hundreds and even thousands of years at a time. These antediluvian humans could have had 5x, 10x, 20x the lifespan that we currently have. And we are kind of at this crux that, we have developed to the point that we're on the verge of an AI apocalypse, the quantum apocalypse, whatever you want to call it. Man might merge with machine in the next few decades. The world is going to get weird very quickly. And we may become a multiplanetary species. We may finally have bases on the moon and Mars within coming decades. Or we may merge with machine and we may leave our physical bodies. We may upload our consciousness to the cloud. I don't know what's going to happen. Obviously, there's that iconic / infamous Alex Jones clip. The elite are going to create a breakaway civilization and merge with machine. Certainly, there's a transhumanist agenda followed by people like Sam Altman and Peter Thiel, who, people like Candace Owens claim that Altman and Thiel and Musk could be alien hybrids. I don't know. It's a weird world. The conspiracy used to be, UFOs are real. Now the conspiracy is Peter Thiel's a fucking lizard. So weird times these are. And yeah, we essentially, I think that in the next few decades, everything about the human story is going to be decided. Whether we become a morally, energetically superior race that becomes multiplanetary and switches finally from obsolete fossil fuel rocket systems, combustion systems. We switch to free energy and anti-gravity and finally give it to the world. Or we potentially are on the verge of another nuclear holocaust, the transhumanist Illuminati type of agenda to form a World War III and cut the population of the Earth in half or in a quarter. And, the elites will hide in their bunkers while the common folk die. I don't know what is going to happen. Again, this is going to be a very speculative episode. But without further ado, some of my ancient apocalypse researchers. I've listened to a lot of podcasts, folks, and these are some of the people I trust, including, but not limited to, almost all of these guys are housed on the Joe Rogan Experience, keep in mind, but Jimmy Corsetti, Jesse Michaels, David Wilcock, Christopher Dunn, Billy Carson, Ben Van Kerkwick, Randall Carlson, Robert Schock, Graham Hancock, Jay Anderson, The Y-Files, a.k.a. AJ Gentile, John Anthony West, Robert Bouval, and many more. And so a couple of these people, I'll say what they're quickly known for. Jimmy Corsetti's kind of known for the Göbekli Tepe conspiracy, as well as his hypothesis that Atlantis could be in the Rekot structure in the Sahara, as well as his thesis that Göbekli Tepe could be Noah's Ark. Jesse Michaels, he's just a UFO, more of a UFO, NHI free energy guy, but obviously into the ancient world as well. David Wilcock, very, very speculative, super conspiratorial, super ambiguous David Wilcock. He's probably, I read his book, The Ascension Mysteries, and it's kind of the most fantastical, crazy account. He talks about his entourage of whistleblowers like Corey Goode and Pete Peterson and a bunch of these guys Bob Dean, that he claims have had super high clearance and they're in the highest levels of the government, and his whole story is completely insane, that the secret space program is on more steroids than we could possibly imagine. He talks about the ancient builder race. He talks about megaliths scattered throughout our solar system, and the Draco reptilians feeding on our souls, and all these different species, and stargates hidden in Antarctica under the ice. But again, it seems like a lot of the more credible ancient apocalypse people don't really trust in Wilcock's account that much. And of course, worth noting, David Wilcock deceased as of April 20, 2026. Mainstream narrative, apparently officers saw him commit suicide and he was in a mental health crisis, but quite weird that his biographer, Win Free, also died just 2 days before Wilcock. Wilcock is on the record saying, the Rothschild type of cabal people are after me for what I'm revealing. And he himself said he would never commit suicide. So there's a lot of people out there that thinks, of course, he was whacked. Ultimately, I'm not here to tell you. I'm just here to make some arguments based on the facts. But there's David Wilcock. Christopher Dunn, the next guy, he's known for the Giza power plant theory, and he's his book is called The Giza Power Plant Theory, that the power plants functioned, the pyramids functioned as some form of power plant, some type of acoustic harmonic device that was able to tap into some universal synchronicities and provide energy to the ancient empire of Egypt and the ancient city of Heliopolis, which is what's buried under Cairo, the city of Heliopolis, which is what we're going to get into. Billy Carson's another one that's kind of way out there. He talks about the stories of Enki and Enlil. A lot of his stuff is speculative, but he's kind of one of the guys that got me into this. His brand is Forbidden Knowledge. Ben Van Kerkwyk is the boy. He talks about the labyrinth of Hawara, the 40-foot metallic UFO that's buried in the labyrinth. And he's big on like the Edgar Cayce stuff, the Atlantean archives buried under the right paw of the Sphinx. Kind of the Hall of Records is what it's called. There's Randall Carlson. He's one of the OGs, the ancient apocalypse OGs, like Graham Hancock. He's kind of known for the stuff in the Scablands, how the Scablands is indicative of this Younger Dryas cataclysm. But yeah, Randall Carlson is one of the most respected OG Younger Dryas type of figures. Robert Schoch is known for the Sphinx water erosion theories. He's one of the first mainstream academic geologists to come forward and kind of blow the whistle on the Sphinx, saying, hey, this is clearly not wind erosion, this is water erosion. And that narrative right there, which seems to be true, it seems to be true that the Sphinx is indeed eroded by water, not just wind, and that pushes the Sphinx timeline back from 2500 BC to at least 12,000 BC. So it's stuff like that you've got one of the top geologists in the world saying this is water erosion, and that 4X is the date. Keep in mind, the date keeps getting pushed back, whether it's the beginning of Homo sapien species or the pyramids or the Sphinx or all these megalithic structures around the world. The date keeps being pushed back because we were modeling after an ancient civilization, an advanced civilization, a maritime advanced global civilization that was erased. We got Graham Hancock. He's known for obviously the Ancient Apocalypse docuseries, the most dangerous docuseries on Netflix, as was called by the Zahi Hawass gatekeeping community, the mainstream archaeological gatekeepers who are so afraid to admit that they are so unbelievably wrong. Graham Hancock is probably the guy that pulled me into this. He's probably the most mainstream guy around now. He's the OG Younger Dryas Ancient Apocalypse. We got Jay Anderson, the Y-Files, AJ Gentile, John Anthony West, Robert Bouval, and more. Check out my Lost Civilization audiobooks. Check out This and That Ancient. But that's part one. All right, I just gave you the abstract of the abstract, the outline of the outline, the origin of everything, part 0. We just talked about the 5 parts that we are going to get into. First up is the reboot, the ancient apocalypse, the Younger Dryas, the cataclysm of 10,000 BC, and the story of Atlantis. Part 2 is the motherland. We're going to talk about Egypt. Part 3, the timeline flip. Part 4, the antediluvian world, the pre-flood world, the stories of the Bible, the similarities between Sumerian tablets and the Bible. And then part 5, the conspiracy of the cosmos, the secret space program, the ancient builder race type of stuff. So let's get into it. Part 1, the origin of everything, the reboot. Ancient apocalypse, Younger Dryas, and Atlantis. We are a species with amnesia. History is cyclical, and time is a flat circle. So part 1 begs the question, what if civilization did not begin once, but has repeatedly risen, collapsed, forgotten itself, and began again? So the outline of part 1, some of the stuff we're going to draw on over our overarching narratives. Part 1, we got Graham Hancock's docu-series, The Ancient Apocalypse, some ancient sites and megalithic stonework and recurring astronomical alignments, including places like Göbekli Tepe and the Vulture Stone, Kaharan Tepe, we got Malta, Easter Island, Derinkuyu, and Cappadocia, the underground cities of Turkey. The White Sands footprint that redates the entire when humans were in Americas from the Clovis timeline to 22,000 BC, which was thousands and thousands of years earlier than we initially envisioned with the White Sands footprint. We're going to get into Gunung Padang, the Amazonian civilizations and earthworks, the whole Peru and Sacsayhuaman rabbit hole, Palenque and Cholula of Mexico, the Nazca lines of Peru, Baalbek, Pumapunku, Yonga-Uni, and the 1 million-year-old Chinese human skull. That's just part 1. Part 2 is centered on the Younger Dryas cataclysm, the channeled scablands, Chan Thomas's classified pole shift, the Ice Age, rising sea levels after the last glacial maximum, and the global reset of human civilization. Part 3, we got the ancient anomalies, including but not limited to the Antikythera mechanism, the Orontius Phineas and Piri-Reis maps, and Antarctica, which places Antarctica on maps well before they were discovered in the 1830s, the Baghdad Battery, and the precession of the equinoxes. Some of the most mysterious tribes of all time we're going to get into with tales from the Dogon, the Hopi, and the Nazca. And then the story of Atlantis from Plato's Timaeus and Critias account. And we're going to get into the narratives about Plato, Socrates, and Solon as it relates to Atlantis. And then the Recot structure theory, the Minoan hypothesis, the 9600 BC date, and the Emerald tablets. And then the last part of this, part 1, is what I call logical cyclicality. This is the Homo sapien timeline versus our timeline, and kind of this logical thesis that there have likely been many advanced human civilizations before this one. The mainstream date of 250,000 years for Homo sapiens of our level of intelligence that have been around, yet we emerged from the Stone Age just 8,000 years ago. It makes completely no sense that we are the first advanced human civilization on this planet if we have had our level of intelligence for 200,000 plus years, and that date keeps getting pushed back. It was 100K just a couple decades ago. Now it was 250K a couple years ago. And then they found this skull in China, which was a close ancestor of Homo sapien that essentially pushes the Homo sapien timeline back to around 750,000 years, let's call it now. So I believe there has been, 5 plus, maybe dozens advanced global human civilizations that have gotten wiped out from some form of a global cataclysm, whether it came in the form of a super volcano, a coronal mass ejection, or a massive tsunami, aka a great flood. I don't know, but I do believe, and the evidence would indicate, based on all the megalithic structures, based on the timeline continuously being pushed back, that we are not the first human civilization, the first advanced human civilization on this planet. And these other human civilizations, they probably evolved in a different way. We went the route of the steam engine and cell phones. They could have went a completely different route. They probably did go a different route that was more aligned with the universe and the cosmos. And all these ancient civilizations used to be obsessed with the constellations and the stars, and they could have evolved in different ways. They probably evolved in free energy type of ways, and they probably were not dependent on a fossil fuel, non-renewable resource ways. And they probably weren't dependent on silicon batteries, and they probably were never going to merge with AI. So that was your outline, part 1, the abstract here, the reboot. For generations, the accepted story has been remarkably simple. Civilization began around 4000 BC in Mesopotamia, while everything before it was a slow and largely uneventful ascent from primitive hunter-gatherers. But the deeper we dig, the less stable that timeline becomes. Göbekli Tepe reveals monumental architecture, organized ritual, and sophisticated symbolic culture thousands of years before such achievements were supposed to exist. The White Sands footprints push human presence in the Americas far beyond the old Clovis boundary. Submerged coastlines conceal much of the world inhabited during the Ice Age, while discoveries across Anatolia, the Amazon, Malta, Peru, Easter Island, and the ancient megalithic world repeatedly force history backwards. The Antikythera mechanism, anomalous maps depicting Antarctica before it was discovered, astronomical alignment, and engineering feats scattered across civilizations suggest that knowledge can emerge, disappear, and then return. None of these mysteries alone proves Atlantis was real or a forgotten global super-civilization indeed existed, but together they expose the conventional history of humanity for what it truly is. It is an incomplete reconstruction built from the small fraction of the past that survived. We are a species with amnesia. We are trying to remember our forgotten past, and it is scattered in religious myth and megaliths that we're still trying to understand. Okay? The reboot advances the founding hypothesis of the entire series, that civilization may not be a straight line, but a cycle of ascent, catastrophe, fragmentation, and renewal. Near the end of the last ice age, the Younger Dryas brought abrupt climactic upheaval, megafaunal extinction, immense flooding, and rapidly rising seas that drowned the coastlines where complex societies would have been most likely to develop. Okay, the places like Atlantis that were most likely to be these advanced ancient civilizations are now buried under the water. Plato placed the destruction of Atlantis around the same distant threshold, approximately 9600 BC. Rather, it was Solon, Plato's great uncle ancestor, in the sacred Egyptian priesthood, that said Atlantis happened 9,000 years before him when he told Plato this. And this came from his tale from 600 BC. Plato wrote about it around in the 350 BC. It was Socrates that died 399 BC. I believe Plato was 346 BC. Plato died, so I think he wrote this around 360. And while cultures across the planet preserve stories of floods, vanished homelands, and civilizing survivors and ages of the world destroyed before our own. Perhaps these are only myths created independently by societies confronting local disasters, or perhaps they are fractured memories of a genuine civilizational reset. What we call the dawn of history may not have been humanity's first beginning, but the latest reconstruction built by survivors carrying fragments of older knowledge in stone, astronomy, oral tradition, and, as the later installments will explore, Scripture itself, biblical Scripture, religious Scripture. We are a species with amnesia. I'll say it time and again in this Ancient Apocalypse Origin of Everything episode, and the question is no longer simply whether civilizations have been lost before, but how many times humanity has awakened among the ruins and mistaken the reboot for the beginning. All right, from part one and the Ancient Apocalypse, the Younger Dryas, and Atlantis, the Graham Hancock Ancient Apocalypse docu-series type of thesis that we are a species with amnesia and we are the descendants of a lost civilization and what we believe to be the beginning of our advanced human civilization and the beginning of overall civilization in Mesopotamia in the mid-4,000 or 5,000 BC. Is really just the reboot of a prior advanced global maritime civilization, one that likely evolved in a way that was more in accordance with the universe than us, one that evolved in different types of ways than us, and we are kind of just discovering the fragments of this ancient advanced civilization. Finally, the timeline of Homo sapiens keeps getting pushed back. The timeline of a lot of these artifacts and megalithic structures keeps getting pushed back. And so the capital of this ancient antediluvian world, in all likelihood, is the motherland, Egypt. Part 2 is the motherland, Egypt before Egypt, the Giza power plant, Sphinx water erosion, Zep Tepi, the first time, ancient Hermeticism, and the sacred land of Kemet. That is what Egypt was called in the olden times, the ancient times. It was not Egypt, it was not Cairo, it was Heliopolis, which was buried under Cairo, and it was Kemet as a country, aka the land of chemistry and the land of alchemy. And we are going to analyze the overarching question: what if dynastic Egypt did not invent the civilization represented at Giza, but inherited, restored, and reinterpreted an older sacred technical tradition? And so the outline here, before the pharaohs, Egypt as civilization's point of emergence. We're going to talk about how the Sahara used to be green, the Nabata Playa, and Hierakonpolis. Part 2, titled Pyramids and Lions, which were inherited and restored, the Giza power plant theory, the idea that the pyramids were a power plant of sorts, an acoustic, harmonic, vibrational frequency type of thing, the sacred geometry of the Giza power plant and Egypt in general, the Orion correlation, the Sphinx water erosion, which pushes back the mainstream date, the inventory stela, which could be the biggest smoking gun, that the pyramids were not created during the Khufu era, and of course the land of acoustics and the theories of John Reed and the King's Chamber resonance. And then we're going to get into the machining evidence, the Serapeum of Saqqara, the precision vases and Petrie's core drill observations, as well as the unfinished obelisk at Aswan. We're going to get into Filippo Biondi's new radar data, which may be suggesting that the pyramids are quite literally just the tip of the iceberg, which with these cylindrical columns that go down hundreds of meters. I believe they go down more than a kilometer into the earth based on these initial radar scans by Filippo Biondi, the Italian archaeologist, and his team. Part 4 is the ancient land of Kemet, Zep Tepi, the Turin Kings List, the Palermo Stone, Manetho's dynasties, and of course Heliopolis and the Ben Stone. The Ben Stone could be one of the most important, maybe it's apocryphal, but the Ben Stone is this essentially this asteroid that fell from the sky that essentially the entire ancient city of Heliopolis was modeled after. They believe it was a stone given to them by the gods with some form of sacred geometry that kind of spoke to them in divine ways, and essentially was the core foundation for the entire Egyptian dynasty, is said to be found in the Ben Stone. And then we're going to get into Hermeticism, alchemy, the Isaac Newton connection, aka as above, so below, the Emerald Tablets, the Corpus Hermetium, Ficino's 1463 translation, and then Giordano Bruno's death, Hermopolis, and the Hermes Trismegistus. And then we're going to get into the Labyrinth of Hawara, aka the Great Labyrinth of Egypt with a tic-tac UFO buried under it, the tales from Herodotus, and Edgar Cayce, the psychic, his Atlantean archives, which could be buried in the Hall of Records under the Sphinx. And then lastly, we're going to get into the stories of Thoth, Ra, Horus, and the Law of One, and these ancient Egyptian mystery schools, and then the Don Elkins, the modern researcher who had a mysterious suicide in the 1980s. All right, so your part 2 rabbit hole, which is going to turn into the most epic ancient Egypt podcast episode of all time. Like I said, I'm turning each of these parts into its own distinctive podcast episode and its own distinctive essay. And this is kind of just the what I call the origin of everything part 0, where I briefly talk about each part's outline and abstract. So I just went through the outline. Here's the abstract of part 2, Egypt, the motherland. So if part 1, the reboot, asks whether civilization actually existed before civilization, the motherland asks where the survivors went, and whether the answer has been standing in plain sight for thousands of years. Egypt appears in the historical record with a fully formed sacred architecture, a sophisticated calendar, centralized kingship, monumental stonework, and a religious system obsessed with returning to an earlier age called Zep Tepi. The first time. I can't wait to get into the lore of Zep Tepi when I do a full dive in this episode. But from the astronomical alignments of the Nabata Playa and the pre-dynastic cultures of the Green Sahara, you got to keep in mind the Sahara literally used to be a rainforest. Rivers used to flow right under the pyramids, and that's why it used to exist as a major capital with Heliopolis. But We're going to look at these pre-dynastic cultures of the Sahara, the engineering of Giza, the marvel that is Giza, and that the story of Egypt may be less one of sudden invention than of inheritance, restoration, and reinterpretation. And what I mean by that is you're a joke of a person if you believe in the 2500 BC date of the pyramids and the Sphinx, and they are in all likelihood thousands and thousands of years older. I personally believe that they are antediluvian. I believe that they are pre-10,000 BC. And I think that, 2500 BC in the era of Khufu is just the last time that they were kind of manipulated and touched, and they changed the face of a lion to the face of a human, and they did some touching up, and they looted the limestone and the gold that used to be attached to the pyramid, and just because that they were touched in 2500 BC, we believe that to be the date they were constructed, but no, that is not the date they were constructed. And so, yeah. The pyramids, cardinal precision, the granite chambers, the 70-ton blocks, the acoustic properties and unusual internal design have inspired theories that it functioned as something more than a tomb. And again, if you believe it is a tomb, you have not looked into the pyramids whatsoever. Okay, the latitude of the Great Pyramid is the exact same number as the speed of light. That is a coincidence that completely bounds that completely is the Great Pyramid's cardinal precision, the granite chambers, the 70-ton blocks, the acoustic properties, and unusual internal design have inspired these theories of Giza power plants, and that it functioned as something much more than a tomb, a resonant initiation chamber, an energy system, or a sacred machine built according to the principles of geometry, vibration, and celestial order. And again, you are a absolute putz if you still believe the pyramids were tombs. They were not whatsoever. They were functional. There is no hieroglyphics. There's no artwork in any of these the pyramids. They're clearly functional. And if you look into the pyramids at all, whether it's the astronomical alignment to true north, south, east, and west, the knowledge of the precession of the equinoxes, the fact that they are aligned with the Orion constellation, or the simple fact itself that the Great Pyramid of Giza, the latitude is the same exact number of the speed of light to the trillionth decimal point. And people want to go and say that's just a coincidence. The metric system wasn't even a thing yet. How could they know? It's because it's a universal synchronicity. Okay, it's not. Maybe they didn't know the metric system, but it's a universal synchronicity because they were more attuned with the universe, and it's literally 29.973 something degrees north, and that's the same exact number as the speed of light at 299.793 whatever meters per second. It is a coincidence that strains the bounds of rational thought. The most mysterious and impressive ancient archaeological structure of all time just so happens to mirror the most important constant in all of physics. Okay? That fact alone, when I learned about it, I was tweaking out in bed. I think that fact alone, by itself, that the Great Pyramid of Giza goes down to the 100 trillionth decimal point degrees north latitude as the speed of light, that itself honestly proves that the ancient apocalypse is real, and that this was likely built by an antediluvian, pre-flood, globally advanced maritime elite civilization that evolved in a different way from us. They were more attuned with the cosmos and the universe, and they weren't doing fossil fuels. They were looking at the cosmos. They were building free energy devices. I believe the pyramids were indeed free energy devices, some type of acoustic harmonic properties that powered the entire civilization at Heliopolis. And this is why they have, it's aligned with Thoth and Horus and the sun god and the law of one. Okay, the writing is on the wall here with the pyramids of Giza. And I'm going to dive deep when I do this episode by itself. But the weathering of the Sphinx, this water erosion theory that pushes them back thousands of years that Robert Schoch has now popularized, the temples surrounding the Sphinx, the Serapeum's immense granite boxes, these precision stone vessels, Petrie's machining observations, and the unfinished obelisk at Aswan all reopen the same question. Were the Egyptians developing these capabilities for the first time, or were they preserving the techniques of a civilization whose origins themselves placed in the age of the gods? So the motherland is going to follow this possibility that beneath the monuments and into Egypt's hidden intellectual world, the labyrinth of Hawara, described by a famous historian Herodotus, legends of the chambers beneath Giza, the Hall of Records, aka the Atlantean archives, predicted by Edgar Cayce, and modern remote sensing claims suggesting that the visible pyramids may only be the surface of far larger subterranean complex. And I think we're going to come to learn that the pyramids indeed are just the tip of the iceberg of devices that go down hundreds of meters into the earth. And so from Heliopolis and the Ben stone to Thoth, the Hermetes Trismegistus, and the Corpus Hermetium, the whole alchemical concepts of alchemy and Isaac Newton's obsession with alchemy, Egypt's deepest legacy may not have been a collection of isolated mysteries, but a unified sacred science, one in which matter, consciousness, sound, astronomy, and spirit were different expressions of the same underlying order. As above, so below. Perhaps Giza was built entirely by dynastic Egyptians using extraordinary human ingenuity, but that's unlikely. Perhaps later generations projected technology onto religious architecture they no longer understood, or perhaps Egypt is exactly what its own traditions claimed, that it was the inheritor of a world before the flood, rebuilding according to plans handed down from the first time Zep Tepi. Part 2, the motherland, the land of Kemet, the land of alchemy, the land of chemistry, Egypt, the motherland of human civilization. Part 2 does not merely ask who built the pyramids. It asks whether the civilization we call Egypt was already ancient when history began. It begs the question that when Egypt was fully discovered by the dynastic Egyptians around this Khufu era of 2500 BC, what if when they found it, it was already ancient? I believe it was. I believe it was 10,000 plus BC, years old. The Great Pyramids, the Sphinx, the most mysterious place on planet Earth, the birthplace of human civilization, the markings of an antediluvian world that developed and evolved differently than current human civilizations, the markings of a civilization that was more attuned with the universe and free energy and the law of one, is Egypt. All right, the origin of everything from part 2, Egypt, the motherland, to part 3, we go. Part 3 is the timeline flip, aka the murder of memory. This is the story of Egypt versus Rome, aka BC versus AD. This is Cicerion's deleted future and the war over the ancient world's lost knowledge. This could be my personal favorite thread in the entire series. It's not as speculative, it's all grounded in truth, and it is the craziest moment in the last few millennia. Was around 38 to 28 BC, when Egypt is conquered by Rome, and then subsequently the Roman Empire begins and the timeline flips from BC to AD. And I, as a conspiratorial-minded fella who is more attuned to the kind of the conceptual frameworks of reality and the idea that concepts and big picture and patterns matters a lot more, I believe that the flipping of time from BC to AD had everything to do with Rome conquering Egypt, deleting the knowledge in the Library of Alexandria, potentially burying the knowledge in the Vatican, changing history, allowing certain scriptures to be in the Bible and certain religious texts to dominate the world. Obviously, the birthplace of Christianity after making him a martyr. It's Rome conquering Egypt. It's deleting the BC, the Egyptian alchemy, law of one, stories of Thoth and Ra and the sun god and Heliopolis and the Ben stone, and creating this new era of the Roman Empire. So, part 3, the timeline flip, we are going to answer the question, what happens when the civilization guarding the memory of humanity is conquered and the conqueror gains control over the archive, the empire, the religion, and eventually the calendar of the human story itself? Keep in mind the word history. His story. That is what history means. Winners obviously write the historical records, and the word history is called his story for a reason. Okay? History is his story. So part 1 argues civilization may have been repeatedly destroyed. Part 2 argues that Egypt may have preserved fragments of an older sacred knowledge system. And part 3 now asks the question, what happens when this civilization, the most dominant civilization on Earth, is replaced by the next most dominant civilization on Earth? The turns have tied, the powers of the world alter in 30 and 20 BC, right before the Roman Empire begins. We're going to get into the biggest lore of all time with Caesar, Cleopatra, and the whole Mark Antony story of everything. Now, the outline of part 3, we have the brain of the ancient world, the Library of Alexandria, Euclid, Eratosthenes, Hipparchus, Camillus, Herophilus, Huron steam engine, the Serapeum or daughter collection. And then we're going to get into Alexander the Great's founding vision, which is another key part of the lore, was how Alexander the Great was welcomed to Egypt with open arms after Alexander conquers the Persian army, conquers most of the known world at the time. 33-year-old Alexander the Great is likely poisoned by one of his war generals in Ptolemy, and that sets forth the Ptolemaic dynasty. Okay, the Ptolemaic dynasty was not an Egyptian dynasty, it was a Macedonian Greek dynasty. And Alexander the Great was welcomed with open arms by the ancient Egyptian priesthood because they genuinely believed he was the son of Ra. They declared him the sun god. They declared him the son of Zeus, and they believed in Alexander the Great's founding vision for a more connected and elevated human consciousness, because Alexander had this vision of a melting pot of civilizations, and mixing and matching with all different types of civilizations in a more diverse civilization. And keep in mind, Alexander was he was tutored by Aristotle. And so we have this famous, people think it just goes Socrates who tutored Plato, who tutored Aristotle, but they forget this fourth guy in the lineage who's the most important of them all, the conqueror. He could have been the philosopher king. I believe he would have been Marcus Aurelius before Marcus Aurelius, but Alexander the Great is indeed poisoned by Ptolemy. Obviously, that's a speculative claim, but I believe it to be true because Ptolemy hijacked his body and then buried him in Alexandria. And that is right when the subsequent decline of Heliopolis happened. So Alexander truly believed in kind of the ancient Egyptian alchemy and kind of the more esoteric Egyptian knowledge, and that's why he was welcomed with open arms by the Egyptian priesthood, and the Egyptian people genuinely thought he was some form of a divine being. And so right when Alexander the Great is killed, the decline of the most important city of all time in Heliopolis is lost to the history books after Alexander is dead and the Ptolemies start ruling Egypt. So yeah, the decline of Heliopolis and Ra, the Ptolemy poison theory, and the Ptolemaic creation of Alexandria. And Alexander had so much lore, so much aura that he had, I believe, built 30 plus different cities called Alexandria, named after him. Obviously, the one in Egypt is the most powerful among them. And then we're going to get into the battles that decided the fate of the world, probably the most important few battles in the entire historical record of humanity: the Alexandrian War, the Battle of the Nile, the Battle of Philippi, the Battle of Actium, and the final Battle of Alexandria once more. And then we're getting to the personal lore, like I said, Alexander the Great and Ptolemy, and then the stories of Cleopatra, Julius Caesar, Brutus, Caesarion, Pompey, Mark Antony, Octavian, and Octavia. This is drama. This is the most dramatic period of the human story. And then we're going to talk about the murder of this alternate timeline, the Greco-Egyptian fusion that never happened, the forgotten history of humanity in Alexandria, and the murder of Hypatia of Alexandria, and the opposing models of power. So this chapter is going to be all about the kind of the speculative, I guess, conditional possible empire that would have been ruled by Caesarion, the son of Julius Caesar and Cleopatra. Most normal people don't even realize that Julius Caesar and Cleopatra had a son, Caesarion, who probably should have brought together the worlds of Egypt and Rome, and potentially would have ruled this Greco-Egyptian Roman hybrid fusion dynasty that really could have, combined all elements of the world. And instead, the Roman Empire takes over, and Egypt, that was built on diplomacy and shared knowledge and libraries, is now replaced by the Roman Empire, which is merely a de facto power, emperor-based empire that eventually brings about the likes of these heinous rulers like Nero and Caligula and Tiberius, and essentially turns what would have been a beautiful Greco-Egyptian Roman fusion hybrid empire ruled by the likes of true philosopher kings like Alexander the Great. And Caesarion was killed when he was 13. He probably would have been a philosopher king himself. Instead, these authoritarian rulers take over, and they rule on the grounds of madness and slavery and de facto power. So yeah, that's your third chapter, and then we're going to get into the pattern of civilizational kill shots, because this is not an isolated thing. We're going to talk about the legend of Troy, Carthage, Persepolis, the Cathars, the Maya codices, Nalanda, and the House of Wisdom. We're going to get into the empire executing the Messiah, the story of Jesus, some alternate theories of Jesus representing the figure that is described as Thoth of Atlantis, who's usually regarded as an alien hybrid, the potential for Jesus to have been some form of an alien hybrid being, the timeline flip from BC to AD, the story of Dionysus and the role of the Vatican, and this overarching concept that whoever controls capital, religion, calendar, and archive controls how the future reads the past. And then finally, we will talk about the lost knowledge from the Library of Alexandria to the basement of the Vatican, ? The knowledge stayed in Egypt until someone came to take it, and the history of suppression, smuggled, canonized, and the Bible as a crime scene. Kind of this overarching notion that maybe the world's mysteries, the biggest library of all time in human history that was housed in the Library of Alexandria, is kind of intentionally burned by the Roman Empire, and the Romans kind of rewrite history the way they see fit and create religion the way they see fit, create the calendar the way they see fit as BC turns from AD. So, part 3, the timeline flip, the lore of Alexander the Great and King Ptolemy and Cleopatra and Julius Caesar and Brutus, who accidentally, one of the biggest ironies in history is that Brutus killed Caesar to prevent a monarchy and prevent authoritarian rulers. In doing so, Brutus himself creates the string of emperors that become known as the Roman Empire. Brutus tries to murder the idea of monarchies and restore power to the Senate, and in doing so, he does the exact opposite because he creates this power bubble that needs to be seized. And in my mind, Caesar would have been a much better Caesar was probably more close to a philosopher king than any of the guys that followed him, including, obviously, Octavian. And let's get into it. Part 3, the timeline flip. If the reboot argues that civilization has been repeatedly erased, and Part 2, the motherland, proposes that Egypt preserved fragments of an older sacred knowledge system and merely inherited the remnants of a lost civilization, Part 3, the timeline flip, asks what happens when the civilization guarding that memory is conquered by a power determined to reorganize the world around itself. So Alexandria was more than a city, and the library was more than a building. Together they formed the intellectual operating system of the ancient Mediterranean world, where Egyptian temple knowledge, Greek philosophy, Babylonian astronomy, Jewish scripture, mathematics, medicine, and mechanical invention were gathered into a single civilizational archive. Euclid systematized geometry, Eratosthenes measured the earth, Hipparchus charted the heavens, and Herophilus opened the human body to scientific investigation, and Hieron designed a machine that seemed to anticipate the future. But Alexandria also stood at the center of a violent struggle between two competing visions of history. From Caesar's arrival in Egypt in the Alexandrian War to the Battle of Philippi and the Battle of Actium and the final fall of Alexandria, the ancient world narrowed around a sequence of assassinations, betrayals, and dynastic wars involving Alexander, the Ptolemies, Cleopatra, Julius Caesar, Brutus, Pompey, Mark Antony, Octavian, and Caesarion, who was the young ruler whose existence itself represented the possibility of this Greco-Egyptian Roman future centered not exclusively in Rome, but in a synthesis of East and West. And when Caesarion was eliminated and Egypt annexed, Octavian did not merely secure a throne, he extinguished the last symbolic heir to an alternate civilizational order. And that's why this gets its own chapter of the origin story, because this defines how we as a human species understand the timeline, the record of history itself, and the religion itself. Christianity, I think, is still the biggest religion in the world, but kind of the Old Testament stories were birthed from the Roman Empire and altered as the Roman Empire saw fit, and kind of the ancient Egypt stories of alchemical hidden knowledge, sacred geometry, and potential alien hybrid Book of Enoch type of beings were suppressed. The Book of Enoch, Book of Giants, Book of Jubilees did not make the Bible potentially because Rome conquered Egypt. The King James Bible version existed because Rome conquered Egypt. So, Rome did not murder Egyptian memory in one battle, nor did the library vanish in a single cinematic fire. The destruction unfolded more effectively across centuries. Conquest redirected wealth and patronage, war damaged institutions, and papyrus archives decayed. Religious factions destroyed rival sanctuaries, scholars were replaced, and Hypatia was murdered, and texts survive only when later powers considered them worthy of being copied or translated. And so this pattern that repeats across Troy and Carthage and Persepolis and Nalanda and the House of Wisdom, this cycle of victorious systems do not merely defeat their rivals, they dismantle the institutions through which those rivals remembered themselves. Rome conquering Egypt changed the entire human story, his story, history as we know it. Into the imperial world consolidated by Augustus, aka Octavian. Then came Jesus, a Jewish teacher who was executed by Roman authority, whose image would later be universalized by the civilization that inherited Rome's political machinery. Centuries afterward, Roman Christianity would shape the canon, the archive, and eventually the calendar itself, placing Christ as the dividing line of Western time through the chronology of Dionysius Exiguus, who is essentially the guy that created the timeline as we know it from BC to AD. Whether lost Alexandrian text ever actually reached the Vatican in any organized form remains unproven. Whether the basement of the Vatican actually stores hidden sacred Alexandrian Battle of Alexandria, the Library of Alexandria archives, we don't know. But the deeper question is who inherited the authority to preserve, restrict, condemn, and define the surviving record. Memory was not murdered once. It was conquered, defunded, fragmented, translated, neglected, and rewritten, until the victorious timeline no longer appeared victorious at all, but inevitable. Rome did not simply take Egypt, it inherited the power to decide where the ancient world ended, where the modern world began, and how every generation afterward would read the distance between them. So this section is the ultimate reminder that winners write the history books. We have seen it in more modern times after World War II. Okay, the modern story of kind of Germany turning into a bunch of demons for a couple of years. Maybe or maybe not JFK's dad was a Nazi and fan of Hitler. I don't know. The origin of everything from part 3 to part 4, the antediluvian world. We just talked about the timeline flip, the murder of memory, Egypt versus Rome, and the stories of Alexander the Great and Alexandria and Heliopolis and Caesarion and the war over lost knowledge. And then we are going to go to part 4, the antediluvian world, aka the multiverse of the Bible. And in here we're going to talk about the stories of ancient Sumer, the Sumerian kings list, the Anunnaki connection, the Great Flood, the Watchers, Genesis, the Nephilim, the Book of Enoch, the Book of Giants, the Book of Jubilees, and the gods who became God. Subheading here, we did not completely forget the old world, we disguised its memory as scripture. That's what I believe. Let's get into the outline. Part 1, we got ancient Sumeria. We're talking about Mesopotamia, Acadia, and their base 60 number system, the Sumerian Kings List versus the Bible and the eerie similarities there, the Epic of Gilgamesh versus Genesis, the story of Anu, Enki, and Enlil, and the advanced Sumerian cosmology, aka the artifact cylinder seal VA243. We're talking about the global flood myths and pre-Bible tablets, the stories in Sumerian, Hebrew, Hindu, Greek, Chinese, Aztec, Norse, Aboriginal, Hopi, Zusarda, Atharasis, and Utanfitism. Every major religion, every ancient civilization has this same story about a global flood myth, and I believe that this is not just some thematic allegory of an ancient flood that represents something. I believe this actually happened. I believe that's what the Younger Dryas are about, and it is in every religious scripture because it's real. We're going to get into the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Forbidden Library, Jude and the Book of Enoch, the Watchers, Nephilim, the Book of Giants, the story of the giants of Kandahar and the giant clans, the Baal connection to the story of giants and the connection to Mount Hermon and Baalbek, the Book of Jubilees, the Son of Man in the Book of Parables, the Genesis Apocryphon and some other apocryphal books that did not get included in the official King James Version of the Bible, and the War Scroll and Great Isaiah. And then lastly, in part 4 of the Antediluvian World, we're going to talk about the Elohim and the Anunnaki connection, this concept of the divine council, Babel, and the technology of heaven, and of course the ultimate speculation territory of Zechariah Sitchin, the planet of Nibiru, aka Planet X. All right, the abstract for your part 4 of the origin of everything, the antediluvian world. Here we go. If the reboot uncovered the ruins of an advanced forgotten world, the motherland, aka Kemet, aka Egypt, traced its inheritance to Egypt, and the timeline flip followed the conquest and fragmentation of its knowledge, the antediluvian world, part 4, is going to ask where the surviving memory went. And the answer may be hiding in plain sight inside the oldest stories humanity still calls sacred. So long before Genesis was written in its final form, Mesopotamia already preserved accounts of kingship descending from heaven, rulers reigning for impossible spans of time, humanity fashioned by divine beings, catastrophic floods, chosen survivors, and civilization beginning after destruction. Okay, the Sumerian Kings List divides history at the flood. We have this in the Sumerian Kings List itself, which is in a museum in Oxford. It talks about antediluvian pre-flood rulers that ruled for thousands of years at a time, and then ultimately gets down to hundreds of years. The time keeps getting shorter and shorter, and then finally returns to the post-flood world of human lifespans of rulers only ruling for a few decades. And what's shocking is that the post-flood, all of the post-flood kings that are part of the historical account, they're all true. They're all confirmed to be true. And, mainstream archaeology and history kind of just dismisses the pre-flood antediluvian rulers as a fabricated myth because we can't possibly believe that there were beings that ruled the earth for thousands of years at a time. Whether these were human beings that lived for hundreds and thousands of years, as is described in the Bible, with people like Enoch and Adam living for hundreds and I think thousands of years in some cases, and Enoch's grandson Noah living for hundreds of years. The similarities between the ancient Sumerian tablets, things like the Sumerian Kings List, and things like even Genesis, which is a complete and utter mirror of the Epic of Gilgamesh and the pre-flood story there. The Bible is based on this Sumerian lore, and the story of the flood extends for almost every major religious scripture. Okay? So, Anu, Enki, and Enlil inhabit a divine order that predates later biblical theology, while stories from India, Greece, China, Mesoamerica, the Norse world, Aboriginal traditions, and the Hopi preserve their own memories of flood, judgment, survival, and renewal. Perhaps these myths arose independently from humanity's universal fear of catastrophe. Perhaps they spread through ancient cultural exchange, or, most likely, perhaps they are fractured recollections of the same lost age retold across continents after the survivors no longer remembered the original event clearly enough to call it history. And that's one of my overarching claims in the Origin of Everything series. What we're told to be as, apocryphal, likely not to be true, most likely just a myth, most likely just some form of a allegorical telling that is, symbolic. I'm here to tell you, in all likelihood, there's stories in the Bible that are real. Okay, there most likely was this massive flood that reset a prior advanced human civilization. There most likely was human beings or hybrid beings that ruled the earth for thousands of years at a time, and human beings used to live hundreds and hundreds of years old. I'm here to tell you there most likely was this concept of the Watchers and the Nephilim and UFOs in the Bible and Ezekiel's wheel within a wheel story, and that UFOs have continually appeared through all religious texts, and they're described as potentially angels and demons, but I think that there most likely was giants that once inhabited Earth, and whether they're the result of, as the story goes in the Book of Enoch, of the Nephilim, with these alien gods like Zeus and Poseidon coming down and descending and mating with human women, and the story of Poseidon mating with Cleito, and producing the Atlantean dynasty, and having each of his 10 hybrid sons, assigning them a specific part of Atlantis to rule, with the oldest one, I believe it was Atlas, as the ruler of it all, and how each of these ancient alien hybrid gods were each entitled to a different part of Earth and a different part of the world. I don't know. We're going to get speculative, but I believe that reality is a lot more strange than fiction at times, and I believe what we believe to be myth in most accounts is actually history. So the Bible in this reading is not merely a beginning, but a compression. Older cosmologies reorganized into a monotheistic drama of creation, rebellion, corruption, judgment, and redemption. Genesis offers only a few cryptic lines about sons of God, the daughters of men, and the Nephilim. The Book of Enoch opens those lines into an entire forbidden universe of watchers descending at Mount Hermon, the hybrid offspring, the forbidden technologies, the corrupted bloodlines, and a flood sent not simply to punish wickedness, but to cleanse a world whose natural order had been violated. The Book of Giants, the Book of Jubilees, and the Dead Sea Scrolls reveal a Second Temple religious landscape far stranger and more expansive than the later Western canon suggests, filled with themes of heavenly councils, angelic warfare, competing calendars, cosmic temples, apocalyptic armies, and a pre-existent Son of Man. From the Elohim and the Divine Council to Babel, the Anunnaki, Nibiru, and the possibility that ancient gods were remembered encounters with non-human intelligence, Part 4, the antediluvian world, moves along the border between theology, mythology, and suppressed memory and suppressed history. Perhaps Scripture is the revelation. Perhaps it is mythology made moral. Perhaps it preserves the testimony of flood survivors, forgotten kings, and civilizing beings. Or perhaps the entities humanity called gods were neither metaphors nor extraterrestrials in any simple modern sense, but intelligences that occupied the threshold between matter, consciousness, and spirit. We did not lose the old world completely. We turned history into myth. We turned alien visitors into gods. We turned gods into angels, catastrophe into judgment, and then we called the surviving translation Scripture. Okay, it's a spiritual battle, folks. It's a cosmic battle. See David Wilcock's book, The Ascension Mysteries, revealing the cosmic battle between good and evil. Humanity is the playing ground for spiritual forces. We are living a supernatural existence, and we are divided between the positive elite and the negative elite, peace, freedom fighters, peace visionaries, JFK, the likes of Tesla, against this cabal that really only cares about money and power and greed, and they're feeding likely an interdimensional negative alien entity. Whether that is a Draco reptilian force, I don't know, but I do believe that humanity is the playground for these extraterrestrial as well as interdimensional forces, and we are a microcosm of the universe and God as a whole. I think the Earth and humanity is essentially this mind between God having the devil on his left shoulder and the angel on his right shoulder, and the universe is essentially God's brain and his bad thoughts of greed and corruption and evil, and his good thoughts of world peace and free energy, as opposed to profit and war and the military-industrial complex. And this shit gets deep in part 4 of the antediluvian world. So the outline for your part 5, the conspiracy of the cosmos, we got the mystery of the moon. The more I learn about the moon, the more I research it, the more I am genuinely coming to believe that the moon might be, and this is a theory that's been proposed by many people, the likes of the ever controversial David Icke. He's popularized this one for me, but I think it may be a hollow artificial terraforming device. I think the moon could be an alien satellite placed here to monitor us, to seed humanity, to stabilize the weather on Earth. I believe that humanity would not have been able to evolve. I don't think an intelligent species would have been able to evolve on the surface of the Earth without the moon, which stabilizes the tides and allows for the 4 seasons that we have today. I believe the moon was placed here by an advanced extraterrestrial species, and I believe the Earth is a petri dish. I believe humanity is an experiment. We're going to get into some bizarre anomalies that tend to support this hypothesis. The 400 coincidence, the fact that the moon is 400 times closer to the Earth than the sun, yet it's also 1/400th exactly the size of the sun, and that's why they appear the same exact size in our sky. We're going to talk about the NASA Apollo mission, where they tested the moon with certain seismic properties, and NASA literally said that the moon rang like a bell. There is evidence that the rocks on the top of the moon are older than the rocks in the bottom of the moon, which is evidence that the moon itself is hollowed out, and is this artificial satellite. There's claims that there's alien species inside of the moon. I'm not going to go that far, even though I just did. But yeah, there's a NASA mission that they said the moon rang like a bell. We're going to talk about the tales of alien bases on the dark side of the moon. Carl Wolf's claims that he saw some type of bases on the dark side of the moon. The claims of the megalithic structures on the moon. Buzz Aldrin's claim that there's a megalithic structures on Phobos, which is a Mars moon. Neil Armstrong's ever controversial quote about Truth's protective layers on the 25th anniversary of the moon landing. We're going to talk about the origin issues with the moon, why kind of none of the mainstream moon origin theories make any sense whatsoever, and the moon landing questions that persist. The moon is weird, okay? The moon is a conspiracy. I don't know which conspiracy it is. I don't know if the moon landing was fake or if there's alien bases in the moon. I don't know, but something is awry with the moon. One of them is the psyop. One of them is the truth. I don't think you can have both in this case. I think either we went there and we found potential indications of ancient life or current alien life, and the fact that the moon is indeed an hollowed out advanced artificial satellite, or maybe we never went to the moon at all. Maybe we couldn't cross the Van Allen radiation belt, and we never went to the moon. I don't know. Ben Rich of Lockheed Skunk Works says that we have the ability to travel 210x the speed of light, and we have the ability to traverse the cosmos, but that technology is never going to get out because it is continually black shelved at defense contractors and would render the entire energy fossil fuel system obsolete. So that's why they don't allow this technology to get out. I don't know if we have this super secret advanced technology that is being kept under wraps. I don't know if Lockheed could go to the moon in a couple hours, or if we never went at all. But there's certainly claims on both sides of the spectrum, and the moon is one of the most conspiratorial frameworks in the history of the world, because a lot of things don't make sense. There's a lot of lies. There's so many inconsistencies. The whole story of the moon makes no sense. But we're going to get into this overarching concept of the broken solar system, the Maldek and Tiamat theories, and this notion that there was indeed a planet in between Mars and Jupiter. I believe that's not even speculative to say. I think the asteroid belt, according to Titus Bode law, there is literally every planet is evenly spaced with, or not evenly, but with the right proportion. And according to this proportions expressed in the Titus Bode law, there is exactly a planet. There was supposed to be a planet in between Mars and Jupiter. There is a gap in our solar system in between Mars and Jupiter in the form of an asteroid belt. I believe the asteroid belt is the indication of a planet that was destroyed in one form or another, whether it was naturally destroyed or whether it was artificially destroyed by ancient alien beings in a form of a nuclear disaster. I don't know, but I believe planet Maldek was real. And we're going to talk about the xenon and argon isotopes, which basically the Mars has isotopes of xenon and argon, which are really not naturally occurring, and they're kind of evidence of a nuclear disaster. We're going to talk about Venus's retrograde spin, the tilt on Uranus, and Mars's hemispheric dichotomy. There's a lot of stuff in our solar system that doesn't make sense. There's a lot of stuff in our solar system that would have me believe that there has been other advanced races that have lived on other places in our solar system, whether it's, the hollow Earth theory, the hollow moon theory, the Mars house hosted ancient life at some point or another, this Maldek Tiamat theory that could have hosted advanced ancient life. I don't know where this advanced life was, but there is all of these anomalies in our solar system that would have me believe that there was some form of a cataclysm on a planetary, solar systematic scale that destroyed an entire planet. And I think the overarching theory that I have is that these ancient advanced beings, whether they were humanoids or not, used to be on Maldek in between Mars and Jupiter. Then they went to Mars. Mars also got destroyed, and now we're on Earth. I think this is the third planet that has been inhabited in our solar system. I'm sorry, I don't know. But we're gonna get into the broken solar system. We're gonna get into the mystery of Mars, the dead world next door. We're gonna get into Cydonia, which is the face on Mars, and the whole concept of remote viewing the cosmos, Project Stargate, and the tales by Ingo Swann, his story of the dark side of the moon, and Joe McMoneagle's viewing of Mars in 1 million BC, in which remote viewer 001 Joe McMoneagle claims to have seen remote viewed humanoids and pyramids 10x the size of the Great Pyramid on Mars. Obviously, it's a remote viewing experiment, can never be definitively proven by these psychic visionaries like Ingo Swann and Joe McMoneagle having these visions, but they did have actionable intelligence data that was proven to be true time and again. I don't think it's that crazy that Joe McMoneagle was seeing what was actually on Mars around 1 million years ago. Lastly, we're going to get into some of the most insane claims in the cosmic lore. David Wilcox, his book, The Ascension Mysteries, aka Revealing the Cosmic Battle Between Good and Evil, the ever speculative and controversial Project Camelot, and that's kind of the whole, it's not quite the whole 20 and back thing, but Project Camelot and Max Spears and kind of we're going to get into some of these strange deaths in a second, but Project Camelot, kind of the concepts of secret space program on steroids, the ancient builder race, the solar warden and Gary McKinnon's theory of the solar warden, and the breadcrumbs of an ancient catastrophe. And we're going to talk about some of these strange deaths and insane claims in the disclosure movement, including but not limited to Carl Wolf, John Mack, Phil Schneider, Max Spears, Pat Price, David Wilcock, Corey Good, Pete Peterson, Gary McKinnon, Bob Dean, William Tompkins, Henry Deacon, Philip Corso, Donna Hare, Maurice Chatlin, and the modern scientists and whistleblowers in the connection to free energy suppression and the black budget Ronald Reagan Star Wars program and the GEC Marconi mystery as well. So Carl Wolf was known for claiming that he was a photographer or a photographic analyzer for NASA. He says he saw some pictures of, bases essentially whether they're alien bases or human bases, who's to say? But Carl Wolf said he saw bases on the dark side of the moon, and he was subsequently killed by a tractor in a super alarming, mysterious way. Similarly, John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist that talks about alien encounters related as they relate to DMT. Phil Schneider, the guy who's, I believe, associated with Dulce Air Force and the underground tunnels. Phil Schneider's also got some fantastical claims. I believe Schneider was taken out. I believe Max Spears was taken out, who ends up throwing up black liquid in a Polish motel, and he's had all sorts of crazy claims. We're gonna get into all these people. Okay, Pat Price might have faked his own death. I don't know. David Wilcock probably taken out. Maybe I don't know. Maybe Dave Wilcock was just a grifter in the whole Ascension mysteries and secret space program, and all of it's just blown up, and he wanted to sell books. I don't know. But he does have some high-level whistleblowers in his books, and he does have a lot of stuff that seems to be true. But to end the origin of everything, part 5, the conspiracy of the cosmos, is going to be the hypotheses of the reality we inhabit. We're going to talk about Loosh theory, zoo hypothesis, prison planet hypothesis, the interdimensional food theory, souls as containers per Bob Lazar, the human farm, and the grand unified origin and the repeating cycle. Oh, God, it's going to get nutty when I do a full episode of this, but Loosh theory is their interdimensional entities that feed off of war and human fear, and that's kind of their food. That's the interdimensional food theory. The zoo hypothesis, Earth as a petri dish, humanity as an experiment. I believe that humans are the result of alien experimentation, and there was some type of accelerated evolution. Whether it was truly the stoned ape theory and our ancestral primates started eating hella shrooms, which grew their brain to be like 2 times as big in like 200,000 period range, which is a completely absurd thing in the evolutionary time frame that modern scientists, modern archaeologists, modern historians don't have an explanation for how the human brain doubled in such a short period of time. Some people attribute it to psilocybin. Other people attribute it to an alien race tampering with primates on Earth and injecting something in the atmosphere in our DNA that caused us to go on this path of accelerated evolution and increased intelligence. I might make the claim it could be both, and that psilocybin could be a type of DMT type of portal to these alien entities, and by engaging with psilocybin and psychedelics, we accessed actual alien entities who discovered primates on Earth, discovered life on Earth, and then they may have physically came and done something to our atmosphere. I don't know. It's going to get crazy, but that was your outline. Let's get into the abstract of part 5, the conspiracy of the cosmos, the final part of the origin of everything. So, if the reboot argued that civilization has risen and fallen before, the motherland traced fragments of that inheritance to Egypt, and then the timeline flip followed the conquest of ancient memory, and then the antediluvian world found its surviving echoes in Sumerian tablets and biblical scripture, the conspiracy of the cosmos now asks the final and most destabilizing question of all. What if the first lost civilization did not even originate on Earth? Mars was once more wet, warm, and probably habitable. The asteroid belt occupies the solar system's most famous planetary gap per the Titus-Bode law. Venus rotates backwards for some reason. Uranus lies on its side. Mars is divided by a violent hemispheric scar that makes no sense naturally. It has elements, isotopes of argon and xenon that essentially do not occur naturally in the quantities they are found in. They are remnants of a nuclear holocaust, either on Maldek or Mars. The moon governs Earth's tides and stability with a precision that has inspired theories of design, capture, and artificial placement. I think the moon could be an artificial alien satellite. And so around these very real anomalies has formed a much larger alternative history. This concept of Maldek or Tiamat as a destroyed world, Mars as its wounded neighbor or displaced satellite, Earth as the refuge, and the moon as a hollow ark or terraforming instrument or observation platform positioned to stabilize and monitor the human experiment. Okay, I think the moon allowed intelligent life on Earth to form. It allows for the seasons, it allows for a stable environment, and it allows for the tides and intelligent human life to arise. I don't think intelligent life could have arose on Earth without the moon. And I think that these remote viewing sessions by Ingo Swann and Joe McMoneagle, conducted under literally the CIA and DIA, described pyramids, humanoid structures, and humanoids themselves, giant beings, and a catastrophe on ancient Mars. Witnesses like Ingo Swann and Carl Wolf claimed activity or structures on the lunar far side, aka the ever-mysterious dark side of the moon. It's weird that the moon is locked in face-to-face with the Earth. We never get to see its dark side. What's that all about? I don't know. But the unresolved mythology surrounding Apollo, Phobos, Cydonia, the face on Mars, and Phobos, there's claimed to be megalithic structures on one of the Mars's moon called Phobos, and the moon's interior transformed solar system from an empty wilderness into a possible archaeological crime scene. None of these claims proves an earlier interplanetary civilization, but together they force a question modern history has never been equipped to answer. Are we the first intelligence to awaken here, or the descendants of a civilization that destroyed itself somewhere else? From that possibility emerges the grandest conspiracy of all. The ancient gods, the watchers, and civilizing beings were survivors, engineers, or overseers. Humanity may have been seeded, modified, or spiritually relocated to Earth, and that the secrecy surrounding UFO retrievals, free energy, reverse engineering, and an alleged breakaway space program exists because disclosure would reveal not merely that non-human intelligence is real, but that human civilization has never been separate from it. The testimonies surrounding the Solar Warden, the ancient builder race, the Law of One, the Draco and Orion cosmologies, and the David Wilcock hidden war between service to self and service to others as this cosmic battle between good and evil. It may be modern mythology assembled from classified programs, religious archetypes, and extraordinary personal claims, yet they converge on the same existential fork. That Earth may act as a school, a zoo, a prison, or a farm, some type of reincarnational rehabilitation zone or laboratory in which consciousness inhabits biological containers and repeatedly confronts the temptation to turn knowledge into domination. I think that Earth is some form of a farm, it's some form of a zoo, it's some form of a prison. The Earth is a petri dish. There are interdimensional forces that are feeding on certain human emotions. You probably have positive interdimensional forces feeding off of love, negative extraterrestrial forces, interdimensional forces feeding off of fear. And it's this cosmic battle that manifests itself in humanity. And wars are fought to feed these negative forces, and feelings of love feed the positive forces. And I think we might be here as these spiritual beings that probably exist in higher dimensions, and we are inhabiting these physical bodies in order to develop our consciousness. And I think the Earth might be like a gym, it might be like a workout in a way, that we're placed into these physical beings in order to expand and develop our consciousness and to reach higher threshold of consciousness and realize that we are these supernatural beings living a physical life. And so planet Maldek may be a myth. Mars may have died naturally. The moon may be exactly what planetary science says. But the warning remains. Intelligence develops faster than wisdom. Technology becomes power. Power becomes control. And civilization destroys itself before understanding consciousness or its place in the cosmos. I said it before in the initial abstract. I'll say it again. The asteroid belt is the graveyard. The Mars is the warning, Moon is the witness, and Earth is the experiment. There used to be an ancient planet in between Mars and Jupiter that is now the asteroid belt. There likely was advanced civilization on Mars. It was the warning, it got destroyed. And the Moon is the witness because it is in probably some form of a alien terraforming device. And Earth is the experiment. We are living in the modern experiment that is mankind. And humanity may be approaching this same path. We may be approaching a tipping point in which we achieve becoming a type 1 civilization on the Kardashev scale, and we may be finally passing the great filter of becoming a multiplanetary species and evolving beyond this barbaric fossil fuel system and tapping into anti-gravity and free energy. Or we may be on the verge of the cabal orchestrating another nuclear doomsday to take out over half of the population on the Earth as a part of the transhumanist agenda. The origin of everything, the conspiracy of reality. I am Matthew Tepedino. I'm your host. That's all for today. Dr. Red Pill, the optimistic agnostic, Mr. Nobody, the sentient entity. Call me Darth Buddha. Good rep today, folks.